are both from Binghamton University, and we are both from the Libraries, from the Digital Scholarship Department. So we do a lot of support for digital humanities projects on campus. And we're just going to kind of give a year in review of what it's been like to sort of launch and introduce people to SUNY Create, which is a domain of one's own. So next slide. So it's just, yeah, like I said, a year in review kind of from our perspective of introducing people to this service. So next slide. So digital scholarship in the library, we're fairly new. We just got founded in 2018. Amy's position was created specifically for digital scholarship in the library, and our community has really grown out of a summer institute that we do sort of every other summer called the Digital Humanities Research Institute. Also, digital scholarship in DH is fairly new to Binghamton. We just became kind of an R1 public university, and a lot of the research that we're doing is still very much traditional. So a lot of the work we do in the library is trying to promote DH and digital scholarship as scholarship and just make it more visible, the work that people are doing. And as part of that, through the SUNY system, which is our state system, we are using SUNY Create. So on Binghamton's campus, the sort of importance of digital scholarship is telling stories and is making them more public and more accessible, not only in the sense of kind of branching out academia to public spaces, but the work that's being done is very much community building, so making these communities in Binghamton or around Binghamton have a space to go to learn from each other or to tell each other's stories and make that more accessible to them. So we have a few different projects going on. We have a Wisdom of the People project, that's a graduate student project. That's just to make philosophy more accessible, to make the conversations around philosophy more public and accessible. Immigrants Wake America is another podcast hosted by Shruti Jain and Lily that just interviews different immigrants and their experience of being immigrants in America. Then we Remigration of Pakistani Diaspora, which is more of a like oral history project being done by a graduate student. And in addition to the projects, we have a few different like working groups and programs on campus that are also engaging in this work. So obviously we have the library, which is through our Digital Scholarship Center. And a lot of what we do is kind of the hands-on workshop, tutorial, tool kind of focused things. But we also offer a lot of networking events and community building events for the people kind of to showcase what they're doing in their projects, but then also to connect our programs on campus like DITA, which is a digital and data studies. It's like liberal computing in the liberal arts kind of style program. And then all of our kind of various working groups across campus. So we have a spatial humanities working group, we have like a graduate digital history interest group, a data visualization history group. And I guess kind of the point is that this work is happening kind of all around campus. There's no one centralized spot that people are working in or are interested in. It's kind of an entire network of people. And then us in the libraries are kind of like a little bit of a hub, and then trying to give people the access and support they need to continue these projects and work on them. So next slide. And then, yeah, why digital scholarship? Right now at Binghamton, a lot of digital scholarship is focused in DH, and it's really focused in this public, engaged, community building way. And people are looking for platforms, they're looking for space, they're looking for collaborations just to help get these voices out. And that's the voices of themselves as researchers, it's the voices of their communities, that are looking to connect with each other. And it's the voices of the people and the things that they've researched that have not yet been explored. So how we fit SUNY Create into all of that. A lot of what people really like about SUNY Create is it's a sandbox for them. And they like that it's a centralized space that they can go to that has a bunch of different tools and platforms that they can learn from and use. But they know that they have support for what they're doing on there from the library. Because Amy and I are both admins. We do a lot of classroom instruction. We do a lot of one-on-one consultation work with graduate students, with faculty, with professional staff, all across the university. So they know where to go when they're looking for something new to explore or use for a project, and then they know they have support for it. And sort of what we're going to be covering is a lot of the supporting material we've created. Could you go to the choosing a platform? Choosing a platform is the biggest question we get. Like, I have this project, what do I use? What's the best part for using it? So I started putting together, and this is not complete, but I don't want to make it too big, like a little story map. So what are you considering? What is the content that you have is kind of where we start. So do you have something that you want to be a digital collection or exhibit? Or are you thinking more of like a blog type style where you have some research, you have some multimedia, maybe you don't need like a whole blown blog site, just like a page to tell a story. And then you can kind of go down. Digital collection and exhibit ends in Omeka, so I'm like, if you're not bothering with a bunch of metadata stuff, like that's not your jam, let's not go over there. let's go back over to the blog site. But this helps them. Like if they get to the bottom and they're like, this isn't what I wanted, they can go back up and kind of reroute. So this is one thing, and all the blue dots are things that are SUNY Create, just to make it really obvious where things are. The library does have our own Omeka S server, so we kind of talk about the difference. Like, do you want to manage your whole own server? Probably not. So we can do it for you. And then, yeah, just like other options. So usually we land on something or a couple different things that they go out and explore and maybe try and add a couple things and figure out the functionality, because that's the next question. Like, how do you want your users to interact with the things that you are creating and you are making for them? And a lot of it, especially for the people who are making podcasts, is just, I want them to be able to play the podcast on the webpage. So then we talk about how you can do that and how you can do that in a lot of different places. But we'll, pick the one that feels right to you. And a lot of this also covers like, how comfortable are you with being digital? Because a lot of them are not comfortable with being digital. They are new. So that's in there too. And then if you go back. And then a lot of the other conversation, because a lot of the questions we get when we're talking about SUNY Create is like, well, do I own my content? It's like, yes, you own your content. But they don't know if they own their content, and if they are insecure about owning their content, how to maintain ownership of their content. So we talk about Creative Commons a lot as far as like putting that on your podcast and your images and stuff like that, the things you're using to build the final site. There's a whole file management side to this that we also go over. So the 3-2-1 rule, like 3 copies, 2 different mediums, 1 in an offsite. And like these basics are mind-blowing to them. I have said, just make a project folder, and that's what you keep all your stuff in, and here's like file hierarchies, and they're like, this has changed my life. So just these basics really are what we are focusing on. And then also, I put together a little project management plan for them, because this is also new, because you get into academia sometimes, and you're just used to like writing paper after paper after paper, and you don't realize that you're going through a process each time you do that. So encouraging them to like step back, think about all of these different processes that go into these long-term or somewhat long-term digital projects, and working through those different parts. So, yeah, and there's a whole other talk of like how much we really borrow from the business world in digital humanities with like our project plans and our file management and all that. But yeah, that's next slide.
So something else that we've learned as kind of a lessons learned as we've gone through this process is to have things like documentation. We started with having OMACA-S, which was something that was added on 2 weeks after I started in a brand new position as digital scholarship librarian, and nobody really knew what they wanted to do with it. They just had promised a faculty member, we will have somebody teach you how to use this and your class can use it, really, which could have been a blog site for what they wanted to do, but it was what was given to us. And because we have people use these different sites, some are using it for their research projects, some are using it with their classes. So you have these different levels of responsibilities or different levels of what people want to do with these different platforms that we need to just clarify in the start of what's our role versus what's your role as a researcher or what's your role as an instructor. And what are the roles of the students too, and how can you maybe help them learn these best practices along the class journey that they're in. So one of the things we've created that we now use for both OMACA-S and SUNY Create is an MOU. And in this MOU, this basically is just a Google form. And we send this to people after they have requested to have a SUNY Create site, or they've reached out to us and want to have an OMACA-S instance of some sort. And this covers a lot of things regarding, who's responsible for backing up the content of the site that you're building, and who is responsible when it comes time to migrate or plan for a migration to another site, which is the researchers or instructors' responsibility. We also talk about adding content to their sites. We have had instances where people thought that they came to us and they give us all their stuff and then we build the sites for them. So we had to make that clear that it's, we provide support for you and can help answer questions, but it's your responsibility to build the content on your sites. It also talks about being clear that you understand any content you put on your site must adhere to copyright laws, or you do have the permission to be sharing them in some way. And we do have our takedown policy linked in here as well, so people can take a look at what goes into if somebody does make a request that something's being shared on one of our sites without permission, what our process is for going through anything with takedown. And then we also talk about if there's no activity after a year of having the site. So if somebody signs up for SUNY Create and then does nothing with it for over a year, we do have limited number of people that can use SUNY Create. So we have a policy where we'll reach out after a year if we see no activity at all, just to make sure you're still planning to come back to this at some point. We know people get swamped with different things. So as long as we hear from somebody, we'll leave it active. And also just making sure people have read and understand best practices for accessibility, which is something we also provide them, that they know that they're responsible for making sure if they make the site public, that they're responsible for it meeting the best practices of Binghamton's accessibility standards. And to help educate on that, a lot of the times as soon as we say web accessibility, a lot of people don't understand what that really means at this point. And a lot of the times, as Ruth was saying, people are coming into this not really knowing how to build these sites already, or already feeling overwhelmed. They need to learn how to teach it to their students. So understanding everything with accessibility and how do you do that in a semester if you're doing it with students becomes a challenge, or how do you do that as your own project if you're on a grant and you're on a time constraint, or you're a graduate student creating a project and you want that done before you graduate. How do you make this all meet that? So something we've come up with is an accessibility checklist. And this is something we had reviewed by a group at Binghamton called TAG, which is our Technology Access Advisory Group. And our web designer from the libraries is also on that group, so he helped us with making sure we hit at least what minimum people should have to make their sites accessible. So we put together this checklist that walks people through what's required and what that means. So we talk about things like alt text, we talk about things like page headings, transcriptions, closed captions, how to add descriptions to your hyperlink text, just the basics that we feel all the sites should have to then meet the requirements that we need at least Binghamton. And we also give them some additional strongly recommended ones that we know may not be as easy to adhere to, but we do recommend doing. And additional resources for people to be able to check out their own site. So things to be able to check out what your site looks like to people with different levels of color blindness. Using the extension on your browser like Wave or anything to test the site yourself and see what comes up as inaccessible. And then just some other links for people to be able to access with that. And one thing we have to do too at Binghamton, because we are the administrators of the site, we will have to run annual checks of any site that is made public by classes or researchers, which is something we haven't done yet because we haven't hit the year mark, but we're coming up on it pretty quickly. So we're going to get to learn what we need to learn about how that process goes, and when we reach out to people, who responds, and how people are able to meet these requirements. And one of the big things that it does become a challenge, especially with instructors and students, because we can educate on these best practices with them. You can talk to the students about it, but they have a time constraint on how long that they actually have to work on these digital projects. And for a lot of them, to learn this whole platform in a semester and also try to meet all these standards and meet all the requirements for the assignments that come into it, it can be a lot and it's very overwhelming. And so we'll see a lot of times instructors may not want to make their site public because it's not meeting all these things, or some do, and then we have to come back to it, and we'll have to figure that out as we hit this date of having to put this out there. But another thing that comes up, and we put this at the end of our presentation, because commonly this stuff ends up being discussed at the end, if at all. Sometimes it's not discussed at all, but it's stuff that's really important to be talked about at the beginning of projects, during projects, and at the end, just having a continuous idea of what your plan is for migrating your project, what your plan is for archiving your project, and what your plans are for preserving your project if you want it to be accessible long term. Thanks. Thank you. We're working on it. But so some things we've tried to talk to people about, especially, sometimes we don't have people come to us until 3 to 6 months after they're already starting something. And then we have to talk to them about where they have to go backwards. And that gets very frustrating for people, especially when they're on those time constraints. So some things we do try to talk to them about with migration, just the general, think about where you would want to migrate this project to when you leave Binghamton. Especially our graduate students, because they may no longer have access to things that they did at Binghamton. So do they want to create their own domain of one's own that they can migrate it to, or do they have other options available to them? Understanding how long it takes to migrate a project, depending on how complex your project is and how much different types of media you have, it could take a while. And emphasizing just the support and the backing up of all the content. Which is something we talk about every stage of it. Did you back it up? Where did you back it up? How many places have you backed it up? And talking about not having it all on this one device in this same room that you have everything else in, and keeping that in mind. And with that, just understanding what type of files are part of your project, just having that file management and structuring available. What options are out there for you. We do have an institutional repository at Binghamton, so some projects could have some components of it at least put on the repository, whereas others may not be able to. So what does that look like for students who are creating a variety of projects, or especially with digital storytelling, we have a lot of people who are putting together things that have video and audio and interactive features to it that just may not have the capability that can go on the orb. But we do have students who are creating podcasts that we can put into the orb for them. So we have their podcasts all accessible, freely accessible there as well while they put it out on streaming. And again, that where are you backing all this project up in case it takes longer to migrate and archive. And then just the preservation. The big question is how long do you realistically expect this project to remain viable? A lot of the times, we want to think that our project 20, 30 years from now is going to be still exactly what it was, but as we even heard from Kathleen this morning, there's a lot of changes that have happened over time. Some things last and some things don't, but that's where it's nice when we're in this open environment that people can continue to build on what they originally started with and migrate elsewhere. They can learn web archiving. It's something that we want to do more education on with people who are having these digital projects on best practices with web archiving and keeping track of their projects. And just understanding what aspects of their projects they do want to preserve. They may create this massive digital media site and they only want to keep the videos or the audio they created from it. They don't really want the written text from it. So understanding, prioritize what media that you want to be saved first. And also with that too, something that I went to NYU, which was for a failure camp, which was led by Ashley Maynor. And she shared with us this digital project self-assessment that she put under a CC license to be reused. So we've been taking this and we want to start talking to people at the start of their conversations about having these self-assessments of just understanding, does your project need to be digital? And why do you want it to be digital? And understanding what that means to have a digital project. If you start out by understanding, what the audience is, what else is already out there, and what the impact of your project will be, making sure this is something you really want to know, and also being real with yourself on what your challenges and limitations are. We all have challenges when it comes to creating the digital projects, whether it be resources, being able to have that server space, that's a common one, at least at Binghamton. Having people with all the different types of expertise. We have projects, for example, where they have students who come on as a grad assistant and they're writing code for them, but they're going to graduate and they're not going to finish the project by the time that the faculty member is ready to put it out there. So then what do you do with this code that's half written that you don't fully understand what it even does? And how do you make sure that that's going to be carried on continuously with other students, or if you're going to learn it? And just having that timeline and workflow ready to go for these different stages between when you're working on your project, but also having those workflows for the migration and the preservation side of it. But that's our gig.
You already have questions coming in, particularly like where can people get all those resources. So at any point you want to share a link, I'll make sure to put it there and beyond. But thank you so much for an awesome talk. I do have one question. I'll start, and I'm sure others have more. Do you find with the orb archive, I'm sorry. I'll rephrase my question for the people out there. Hello, people out there. Do you have resources in the orb for archiving not just text and images and podcasts, but also video and other different media? And is that like part of what you'll archive, or are you looking for other ways? And then my other question is, do you get requests for research projects, other projects where the cPanel LAMP environment isn't enough? That people need something beyond that. So those are my two questions, and thanks for a great talk.
I'll ask into the orb.
Yeah, I don't know anything about the orb.
So we can archive video content into the orb, and right now I'm working on some guidelines for it. The orb was something that started about 1.5 years before I got there, and it's evolved in itself. So there wasn't really much guidelines to it. They did have one guideline of like what they were seeing people interested in putting in there, but it's changed so much with students creating these digital projects and having media content. So I'm working on better guidelines to help people understand archiving. I've been working on with our metadata expert in the library to make sure people understand metadata and how to actually make their information discoverable and explainable to a public audience. and following accessibility best practices in there too. So if you want your video in there, it needs closed captions. If you want your audio in there, it needs transcriptions. So it's a work in progress, but we're getting there with that. And right now it has a lot of capabilities like that, which is nice. We haven't run into anything quite yet that people haven't been able to share in it, which is awesome.
Just follow up, what's the org built on?
It's digital commons. Yeah.
Yeah, and to the other point, we did have someone approach us with a sort of half-built project that they were looking for a space for, that the LAMP server was not going to work around, but had they come to us before building, that would have been a perfectly serviceable environment for them. So a lot of it is just making us more visible, making the services we have more visible, so people come to us before they start building. So if they do run into a problem, which this person did, of not having space for it, we can make sure that the project and the space meld. Yeah.
You want to scroll your presentation back and show us the...
We have the bit.ly.
Oh,
at
yeah,
the
yeah.
top. Yeah. Yeah, and everything's linked. I don't know if everything's shared public, but if you run into a link, you can just let us know.
I think they're all public, but I can double check after.
Feels like I'm talking to a battery pack. Again, thank you for this great presentation. I mean, this is the kind of thing that I need to see everywhere. Now, you're in the SUNY system, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, you work with Binghamton University. Are you connecting with the SUNY system as a whole in any way? Are you following the famous promise of systemness?
Not enough. Yeah, not enough.
We have our
Yeah,
good friend here, Ed Beck from SUNY Oneonta, that we talk with quite often.
Yeah.
We do have some colleagues that we communicate with between Albany, Geneseo, and then sometimes Buffalo and Stony Brook with different things that are going on. We have tried for this stronger community, especially in digital scholarship and SUNY. A lot of it was happening post-2020, and then things are just slowly starting to be more communicative again. So right now we have Ed at least, but we're hoping to try to grow this more, and we've been talking and brainstorming ways of how we can make more of a community across SUNY and share these resources more openly across the SUNYs, because we have schools too that have very little funding compared to what some of our bigger ones do. And so they don't have access to a lot of the stuff that we do, so how can we help support them so that they can also be doing at least some of the things that they want to be doing.
Yeah.
Sure. Great.
Okay, we're at time.
Or time, okay. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you all.